Captain Taeho Kim stared at the navigation screen of his cargo ship Soul's Pride and rubbed his tired eyes with the back of his hand. 3 weeks of hauling mining equipment to the outer rim systems had left him exhausted, but the credits were good, and his small crew needed the work. The ship was old and patched in dozens of places, but she flew steady, and that was all that mattered in this business. His first officer, Heejin Park, looked up from her console where she had been reviewing cargo manifests and stretched her arms above her head. She used to work for some big corporation handling legal contracts before she got tired of the politics and joined Taeho's crew. Her sharp mind for numbers and contracts had saved them from more than one bad deal. "Captain, we're picking up a distress signal," called out their communications officer from his station near the back of the small bridge. Taeho frowned and walked over to look at the readings. Distress calls in this part of space usually meant pirates or worse, but ignoring someone who really needed help went against everything he believed in. His father had taught him that helping others was always the right thing to do, even when it cost you something. "What kind of signal?" he asked. "Old frequency, sir, very old, and the ship design doesn't match anything in our database." Hyojin joined them at the communication station and studied the readings with her careful eyes. She had seen thousands of different ship types during her corporate days and prided herself on recognizing most of them. "This is strange, Taeho," she said quietly. "The energy signature is unlike anything I've ever seen, and that distress call is being broadcast on channels that haven't been used for centuries." Taeho made his decision quickly, as he always did. Overthinking problems never helped anyone, and someone out there needed assistance. "Set course for the signal," he ordered, "and tell the crew to prepare for possible rescue operations." The Soul's Pride changed direction and headed toward the source of the distress call. As they got closer, they could see a ship unlike anything any of them had ever encountered. It was massive but seemed to be built from some kind of crystal material that caught and reflected light in impossible ways. Parts of the hull were clearly damaged and atmosphere was leaking from several sections. "My God," whispered Hyojin. "What kind of technology is this?" The ship was clearly ancient, but the design was so advanced it made their own vessel look like a child's toy. Strange symbols covered the hull in patterns that seemed to shift and change as they watched. "We're getting a response to our hail," reported the communications officer. "It's weak, but someone is alive over there." The voice that came through their speakers was unlike anything they had heard before. It sounded like wind chimes mixed with the sound of breaking glass, but somehow their translation systems were able to make sense of the words. "Please help me," the voice said. "I am dying, and I have something important to give to someone worthy." Taeho looked at his crew and saw his own determination reflected in their faces. Whatever this was, they couldn't just leave someone to die alone in space. "We're coming aboard," Taeho replied through the communication system. "Hold on." The docking process was difficult because the alien ship's docking ports were completely different from anything they knew, but Hyojin managed to figure out how to make a seal using their emergency airlocks. The atmosphere readings showed the air was breathable for humans, though it smelled strange like old flowers and metal. Taeho and Hyojin put on their emergency suits just to be safe and made their way through the airlock into the alien vessel. The corridors were tall and narrow, with walls that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Everything was beautiful, but clearly very old, and in some places they could see where damage had been hastily repaired. They followed the weak life signs deeper into the ship until they found what must have been the bridge or command center. In the middle of the room was a being unlike anything either human had ever seen. It was tall and thin, with skin that looked like polished stone and eyes that held the wisdom of ages, but it was clearly dying. "You came," the being said in its strange, musical voice. "I am Veltar of the Nexari people, and I have been waiting so long for someone like you." Taeho knelt beside the alien and could see that its injuries were far beyond anything their medical supplies could handle. This being had been dying for a long time and was only staying alive through sheer will. "What happened to you?" Hyojin asked gently. Veltar's eyes became sad and distant, as if remembering terrible things from long ago. "My people were the greatest traders in the galaxy once," he said slowly. We brought peace and prosperity to hundreds of worlds through fair commerce and honest dealing, but the Galactic Council saw our success as a threat to their power. The alien paused to catch his breath, and Tejo could see that even talking was becoming difficult. They destroyed us through lies and legal tricks. Veltar continued. They claimed we owed them impossible debts for services we never received, and protection we never asked for. When we refused to pay these false debts, they sent their fleets and took everything we had built over thousands of years. Hyojin leaned forward with interest because this sounded like the kind of corporate warfare she had seen during her legal career, but on a galactic scale. They hunted down every member of my species. Veltar said, I am the last one left, and I have spent 300 years gathering evidence of their crimes. I have complete records of everything they did to us and to dozens of other species who suffered the same fate. The dying alien reached into his robes with trembling hands and pulled out a device that looked like a crystalline data storage unit. I transfer all claims against the Galactic Council to your species, he said, looking directly at Tejo. Under the ancient laws of commerce that still govern galactic trade, these debts and the evidence of fraud become yours to collect. Tejo started to protest that he was just a cargo hauler and couldn't possibly handle something so important. But Veltar held up a weak hand. Your people are young, but I have watched you, the alien said. You stopped to help a dying stranger when you could have, simply ignored my call. You have the honor and courage that my people once had. The galaxy needs someone who will stand up to the Council's corruption. Hyojin was studying the device with growing amazement as her legal training helped her understand what they were being given. Tejo, she whispered. If this is real and legally binding under galactic law, then humanity just inherited claims worth more money than exists on most planets. Veltar smiled for the first time since they had found him. Much more than that, he said. The debts have been growing with compound interest for 3 centuries. The Galactic Council now owes the rightful heirs of these claims enough credits to buy and sell entire solar systems. The alien's breathing became more labored, and both humans could see that his time was running out. Use this wisely, Veltar said. Make them pay for what they did to my people, and to all the others they have destroyed. Show the galaxy that there is still justice to be found among the stars. With those words, the last of the Nexari died, peacefully, knowing that his long quest for justice would continue in the hands of these unlikely humans. Tejo and Hyojin sat in stunned silence for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. They had come here expecting to help with a simple rescue and instead found themselves holding documents that could change the balance of power in the entire galaxy. What do we do now? Tejo asked. Hyojin looked at the crystalline device and then at her captain with determination in her eyes. We take this back to Earth, she said, and we make sure the right people know what we've found. The Galactic Council is about to learn that humanity doesn't forget debts or ignore injustice. 3 weeks after finding Veltar's ship, the Soul's Pride docked at Earth's orbital station above the blue and white planet that humanity called home. Tejo and Hyojin had spent the entire journey studying the crystalline device and trying to understand the massive amount of information it contained. Every day brought new discoveries that made their situation seem more impossible and more important. Hyojin had worked almost non-stop translating the legal documents from ancient galactic trade languages into something human lawyers could understand. Her corporate background helped her recognize the contract structures, but the scale of what they were dealing with was beyond anything she had ever seen in her career. The compound interest calculations alone take up 3 entire data cores, she told Tejo as they waited for the docking procedures to complete. And that's just for the primary debt claims. There are also penalty fees for wrongful seizure of assets and damages for what they call species-wide economic destruction. Tejo shook his head in amazement. He was a simple cargo hauler who had never owned more than his ship and a small apartment on Earth. Now he was carrying documents that claimed humanity owned debts worth more than most planetary governments. Earth's government had been notified of their arrival and the importance of what they carried. Ambassador Jae-Sung Lee was waiting for them at the docking bay along with a team of lawyers, economists, and military advisors. The ambassador was a tall, serious man who had spent 20 years dealing with alien governments and had earned respect throughout human space for his diplomatic skills. Captain Kim, the ambassador said as they disembarked. "I understand you have something that could change humanity's relationship with the Galactic Council." Hyojin stepped forward and handed him the crystalline device, along with the preliminary translations she had prepared during their journey. "Sir, this contains legal claims against the Galactic Council that, if valid, would make them owe humanity approximately 2.7 trillion galactic credits, plus 3 centuries of compound interest." The ambassador's carefully controlled expression cracked slightly as he processed what she had said. "That's more than the entire economic output of most galactic sectors," he said quietly. "Are you certain these claims are legitimate?" The contracts appear to be written under the ancient Nexari legal system, which was incorporated into the foundation of galactic commercial law, Hyojin explained. "Every major trade agreement in the galaxy still references these original frameworks, which means the debts should be legally enforceable." Over the next several days, Earth's best legal and economic minds worked around the clock to verify what Taiho and Hyojin had brought them. Mi Young Cho was Earth's leading expert on galactic economics, and her analysis of the financial implications left even her speechless. "The total debt, including interest and penalties, comes to nearly 40% of the Galactic Council's total economic capacity," she reported to the emergency session of Earth's leadership. "If we can actually collect on these claims, it would fundamentally shift the balance of economic power in known space." Hyun-Woo Nam was Earth's top military strategist, and his concerns were more practical than economic. "The Council will never pay willingly," he warned. "The moment we present these claims, they will view humanity as an existential threat to their control over the galaxy. We need to be prepared for them to respond with force rather than negotiation." Ambassador Lee listened to all the reports and recommendations before making his decision. "We cannot ignore this opportunity," he said. "The Nexari were clearly victims of galactic injustice, and if we have the legal authority to seek compensation for their suffering, then we have a moral obligation to do so. I will present the claims to the Galactic Council formally." The journey to the Council's headquarters on the neutral station of Galactic Prime took 2 weeks. Ambassador Lee traveled on Earth's newest diplomatic vessel, accompanied by a team of lawyers and economists who continued analyzing the Nexari documents during the trip. The more they studied the evidence, the more convinced they became that the case was ironclad. Galactic Prime was a massive space station that served as the seat of galactic government. Representatives from hundreds of species conducted business in its corridors, and the council chamber itself was the impressive hall designed to demonstrate the power and authority of the galactic government. Chancellor Thys of the Zenthari was the current leader of the Galactic Council and had held power for over 30 years through careful political maneuvering and ruthless suppression of opposition. He was known throughout the galaxy as someone who valued order and control above all else. The council session where Ambassador Lee presented humanity's claims was supposed to be a routine diplomatic meeting, but it quickly became something much more significant. Lee stood before the assembled representatives of dozens of species and calmly explained what humanity had discovered. "The human government formally presents these legal claims against the Galactic Council for debts owed to the Nexari people whose rights and assets we now represent under ancient galactic commercial law." Chancellor Thys leaned forward in his ornate chair with an expression of amused disdain. "Ambassador Lee, surely you cannot be serious," he said. "The Nexari were destroyed centuries ago for their refusal to pay legitimate debts to the Council. Any claims they might have had died with them. With respect, Chancellor, the legal documentation shows that the debts claimed against the Nexari were fraudulent," Lee replied, "and under the law of commercial succession, their legitimate claims have been transferred to humanity." The Chancellor's amusement faded as he realized the humans were not making some elaborate joke. Even if such claims existed, the amounts would be trivial after so much time, he said. Lee activated a holographic display that showed the debt calculations in numbers so large they filled the air above the council chamber. "The current total, including compound interest and penalties, is approximately 11.4 trillion galactic credits," he announced. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of several council members choking on their breathing apparatus. Even species known for their emotional control looked shocked by the magnitude of the claim. Chancellor, This recovered first, and his voice took on a threatening tone. "Humans, you clearly do not understand the gravity of what you are attempting," he said. "The Galactic Council does not respond well to extortion or fraudulent claims. Then you will welcome the opportunity to have your own legal experts verify the authenticity of our documentation," Lee replied calmly. For the next 3 days, the Council's legal team worked frantically to find flaws in the human claims. They brought in experts on ancient galactic law, commercial contracts, and Nexari legal traditions. Every analysis confirmed what the humans already knew. The claims were absolutely legitimate and legally binding. When the Council's chief legal advisor delivered his report to Chancellor Thiss in private, the Chancellor's reaction was explosive. "Impossible," he raged. "There must be some way to invalidate these claims." "I'm afraid not, Chancellor," the advisor replied nervously. "The contracts are written under legal frameworks that form the foundation of all galactic commerce. Invalidating them would require dismantling the entire structure of galactic trade law." "Then we change the law," Thiss declared. "That would require unanimous agreement from all council members, and even then it would not apply retroactively to existing contracts." Chancellor Thiss realized that for the first time in his political career he was facing a problem that could not be solved through intimidation or legal maneuvering. Meanwhile, news of humanity's claims had begun leaking to the galactic. Media and financial markets were responding with panic. The possibility that the Galactic Council might actually owe such massive debts to a young species like humanity was causing credit ratings to collapse and trade agreements to be suspended. Young Cho watched the market chaos from Earth and smiled grimly. "They're starting to understand that we're serious," she reported to the emergency government session. "Several major financial institutions have already frozen council assets, pending resolution of the debt claims." Ambassador Lee returned to Earth with the Council's official response, which was predictably hostile. "They refuse to acknowledge the debts and have threatened economic sanctions against any species that supports our claims," he reported. "But their own legal team has confirmed that we have an unbreakable case under galactic law." "What's our next move?" asked Earth's President He Jin, who had been invited to join the government discussions as an expert on the case, spoke up. "We start collecting," she said simply. "We file formal collection notices with every major financial institution in the galaxy, and we make it clear that anyone who continues to do business with the Council while they're in default risks becoming complicit in the debt." The legal earthquake that began with Veltar's dying gift was about to shake the foundations of galactic civilization. The Galactic Council's first attempt to avoid paying humanity's debt claims came in the form of emergency legislation. Chancellor Thiss called for an extraordinary session to pass laws that would invalidate all ancient debt contracts, but the effort failed when several member species refused to support measures that would undermine the legal foundation of galactic commerce. Their second attempt was more direct. Council agents approached Earth's government with offers of exclusive trade deals, advanced technology, and even territorial concessions if humanity would quietly withdraw their claims. Every offer was politely declined because the human government had decided that justice for the Nexari was more important than any bribe. When legal maneuvers and bribery failed, the Council turned to what they knew best, which was intimidation through military force. Chancellor Thiss authorized the deployment of 3 full Council fleets to human space, with orders to demonstrate the consequences of defying galactic authority. Admiral Sojin Kang stood on the bridge of Earth's flagship, the New Sol, and watched the massive Council fleet approaching through the outer solar system. The enemy ships were impressive with heavy armor, powerful weapons, and shields that could withstand tremendous punishment, but they were also slow, predictable, and commanded by officers who had never faced an opponent willing to fight unconventionally. "Admiral, their lead ships are demanding our surrender," reported her communications officer. "Tell them we're still calculating our response." Sojin replied calmly. The human fleet was smaller and less heavily armed than the Council forces, but Sojin had spent months preparing for this confrontation. She had studied every Council military engagement for the past century and identified their weaknesses. Council tactics relied on overwhelming firepower and the assumption that their enemies would fight according to established military doctrine. Human military thinking had developed very differently because Earth's history was full of smaller forces defeating larger ones through speed, cunning, and willingness to take risks that their enemies considered impossible. All ships implement dispersal. Pattern 7. So Jin ordered. The human fleet scattered in all directions, moving too fast for the Council ships to track effectively. Instead of forming the traditional battle lines that Council commanders expected, each human vessel began operating independently, using hit-and-run tactics that had been perfected during Earth's own wars. Commander Gi-tae-yoon piloted his small attack ship through the Council formation like a dancer, avoiding the heavy weapons fire and striking at weak points in their formation. His ship was so much smaller and faster than anything the Council had faced that their targeting systems couldn't keep up with his movements. Their command ship is trying to coordinate a response, he reported over the tactical network, but they're having trouble adapting to our spread formation. So Jin smiled as she watched the Council fleet struggling to respond to tactics they had never encountered. Begin Phase 2, she ordered. All ships target their communications arrays and sensor systems. The human fleet focused their attacks on the Council ships' ability to coordinate with each other, rather than trying to destroy the heavily armored vessels directly. Within hours, the mighty Council fleet was reduced to a collection of individual ships that couldn't communicate effectively with their commander's fleet. Admiral Korth was the Vaxian officer commanding the Council forces, and he had never experienced anything like this battle. His ships were individually superior to anything the humans possessed, but they couldn't bring their advantages to bear against enemies who refused to fight according to the rules. How are these primitives defeating us? He demanded from his bridge. Sir, their tactics are completely outside our military doctrine, his tactical officer replied. They're not trying to win through direct confrontation. They're making it impossible for us to function as a unified force. Meanwhile, on Earth, Da-Yun Lim was implementing the economic warfare portion of humanity's strategy. She had identified the financial institutions that provided credit to the Council's military operations and was systematically calling in the smaller portions of humanity's debt claims that targeted those specific organizations. We don't need to collect the entire debt at once, she explained to the government's emergency council. We just need to make it clear that anyone who supports the Council's military actions against us will face immediate financial consequences. Her strategy was working better than anyone had expected. Major galactic banks began freezing Council assets and refusing to process military payroll transactions because they couldn't risk being held liable for the debts that humanity now owned. Back in the solar system, the Council fleet was discovering that their superior firepower meant nothing if they couldn't coordinate their attacks or maintain their supply lines. Human ships continued to harass them while avoiding direct confrontation, and the financial pressure from Earth was making it impossible to maintain their military operations. Admiral So-jin received reports that other Council fleets were being deployed to human colonies and other systems, but she wasn't concerned. Every human military commander had been trained in the same unconventional tactics, and the economic warfare campaign was affecting Council operations throughout the galaxy. Admiral, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 Council ships. Her communications officer reported. They're requesting permission to withdraw from human space. Granted, So-jin replied, but make sure they understand that any future military actions against human territory will result in us calling in larger portions of our debt claims. The Council's military defeat was complete, but Chancellor Thys was not ready to accept the new reality. He called for emergency sessions with other major galactic powers trying to build a coalition against humanity, but found little support. Other species had been watching the conflict with great interest, and many were asking uncomfortable questions about their own relationships with the Council. If the Council had destroyed the Nexari through legal fraud, what other species had suffered similar fates? The Corvani were the first to openly break ranks. Their representatives stood before the Council and announced that they were suspending their membership pending a full investigation of Council financial practices. The Helix quickly followed, and within days, several other species had withdrawn their support from the galactic government. Da-Yun Lim watched the political chaos from her office on Earth and realized that they had achieved something far more significant than just collecting a debt. We're not just forcing them to pay what they owe, she reported to the government leadership. We're exposing the fundamental corruption that holds their entire system together. Chancellor Thys found himself facing the collapse of everything he had worked to build. The military had failed, the financial system was in chaos, and his political coalition was falling apart. How did a single species of primitives manage to destroy 3 centuries of galactic order? He raged at his advisors. They didn't destroy it, Chancellor replied his chief of staff quietly. They simply refused to pretend that the corruption was legitimate and forced everyone else to see what was really happening. The Council's attempts to maintain power through force had failed completely. Human tactics had proven that superior numbers and firepower meant nothing against opponents who were willing to fight smart rather than fight fair. But more importantly, the economic and legal pressure had exposed the Council's systematic exploitation of other species. What had begun as humanity seeking justice for an extinct alien race had become a galactic awakening about the true nature of Council rule. As reports came in from across the galaxy about species declaring independence from Council authority, it became clear that the old order was collapsing. Admiral Sojin stood on her bridge watching the last Council ships retreating from human space and realized that they had won something far more valuable than a military victory. "Admiral, what are your orders?" asked her communications officer. "Signal all human ships to stand down from combat operations," she replied, "but maintain defensive positions. Something tells me we're going to be very busy helping to rebuild galactic civilization." The storm that had begun with the Council's attempt to intimidate humanity was ending, but in its wake was coming something entirely new. Dr. Wanshik Choi had spent his entire career studying alien societies and understanding how different species interacted with each other. When the government asked him to help exploit the growing divisions within the Galactic Council, he knew exactly where to begin his work. The Council's power had always depended on keeping member species divided and dependent, but the crisis with humanity was revealing cracks that had existed for centuries. Dr. Choi assembled a team of xenosociologists and began systematically documenting how the Council had used the same tactics against dozens of other species that they had used to destroy the Nexari. "The pattern is consistent across every case we've examined," he reported to Earth's leadership. "The Council identifies successful independent species and then creates artificial debt crises to justify seizing their assets and forcing them into dependency." His research team had found evidence that the Corvani had lost their most profitable mining operations to fraudulent Council claims 50 years earlier. The Helix had been forced to surrender their advanced manufacturing technology after being accused of violating trade regulations that didn't actually exist. Each species had been isolated and pressured individually, so they never realized that they were all victims of the same systematic exploitation. Minister Yoon-Suk Han was Earth's most skilled trade negotiator, and she began reaching out to the species that Dr. Choi had identified as Council victims. Her approach was simple and direct. "We know what they did to you," she told the Corvani leadership during their first meeting, "and we have the legal authority to help you get back what was stolen." Consul Cathara was the elected leader of the Corvani people and had spent decades trying to rebuild what his species had lost to Council predation. When Minister Han showed him the evidence from Veltar's records, his reaction was immediate. "We withdraw our membership from the Galactic Council effective immediately," he announced, "and we formally request Earth's assistance in recovering our stolen assets." The Helix response was even more dramatic. Prime Helix Zan declared not just independence from the Council, but active rebellion against what she called 3 centuries of organized theft and oppression. "The time for peaceful resistance is over," she announced to her people. "We will reclaim what is ours and help other species do the same." Within weeks of Dr. Choi's research being shared with potential allies, a cascade of defections began that threatened the very existence of the Galactic Council. Minister Han found herself coordinating what amounted to a galactic revolution as species after species declared independence and requested Earth's help in seeking justice for past wrongs. "We're not trying to replace the Council's empire with our own," she explained to each new ally. "We want to create a system where trade and cooperation happen through mutual benefit rather than exploitation." The economic implications of the growing rebellion were staggering. Day and Lim calculated that if humanity helped all of their new allies recover what had been stolen from them, The total debt claims against the Council would exceed the economic capacity of the entire known galaxy. They literally cannot pay what they owe, she reported. The Council has been operating a pyramid scheme on a galactic scale, and we've just caused it to collapse. Chancellor Theiss watched his empire disintegrating and realized that military force could not solve this crisis. Too many species were involved, and humanity had proven that Council fleets were useless against opponents who fought unconventionally. What do our intelligence services report about human intentions? He asked his remaining advisors. Sir, the humans appear to be genuinely committed to establishing a fair system of galactic governance, came the reply. Our agents have found no evidence of territorial ambitions or attempts to establish human dominance. This news was almost more disturbing to Theiss than open conquest would have been. He understood power politics and military expansion, but he could not comprehend opponents who seemed genuinely motivated by abstract concepts like justice and fairness. Dr. Choi's research had uncovered something even more damaging to the Council than individual cases of fraud. The Nexari records contained evidence of what could only be described as systematic genocide through economic warfare. They didn't just steal from successful species, he reported. They deliberately destroyed any group that developed technology or social systems that might threaten Council control. The evidence showed that over the past 3 centuries, the Council had eliminated dozens of species that had developed faster than light travel, more efficient manufacturing, or more democratic forms of government. The Nexari had been just one target in a much larger campaign of oppression. When this information was shared with the galactic media, the political impact was immediate and devastating. Species that had remained neutral in the growing conflict suddenly found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about galactic civilization. Even some of the Council's most loyal members began to distance themselves from the government. The Zenthari, who had provided Chancellor Theiss with his power base, were among the first to abandon him when evidence emerged that the Council had been planning to eliminate their species as soon as more compliant allies could be found. The Chancellor no longer speaks for the Zenthari people, announced their new leadership. We condemn the criminal actions taken in our name, Minister Han found herself coordinating not just trade agreements but the complete reconstruction of galactic civilization. Representatives from nearly 100 species were requesting Earth's mediation in resolving disputes that had festered under Council rule. We need to establish some kind of interim government, she reported to Earth's leadership. The old system is gone, but we need something to maintain order while we build a replacement. The solution came from an unexpected source. Captain Taeho Kim, who had been quietly watching the galactic transformation he had accidentally triggered, suggested that they model the new system on the principles that had guided the original Nexari trade networks. According to Veltar's records, the Nexari succeeded because they treated every species as an equal partner. He said, no one was forced to do anything, and everyone benefited from voluntary cooperation. Dr. Choi's analysis of Nexari social structures revealed a sophisticated system, a voluntary association that had maintained peace and prosperity across hundreds of worlds for thousands of years, before the Council destroyed it. They had no central authority in the traditional sense, he explained. Instead, they used networks of mutual obligation and shared benefit that made conflict unprofitable for everyone involved. The idea of rebuilding galactic civilization around Nexari principles gained support from species across known space. Even former Council loyalists admitted that the old system had failed and needed to be replaced with something better. Chancellor Theiss made one final attempt to maintain power by offering to reform the Council and address the legitimate grievances that had been raised. His proposal was rejected by virtually every species in the galaxy. Reform is not enough, declared Prime Helix Zan. The system itself is corrupt and must be completely replaced. Within 6 months of Veltar's death, the Galactic Council had effectively ceased to exist as a governing body. Some member species attempted to maintain local authority, but most recognized that the old order was finished. Minister Han stood before the largest gathering of galactic representatives in recorded history and formally proposed the establishment of what they were calling the Free Trade Confederation. This new organization will be based on voluntary participation, mutual benefit, and absolute transparency in all dealings, she announced. No species will be forced to join, and no species will be prevented from leaving. The response was overwhelming support from representatives of nearly 200 species, including many that had never been allowed to participate in galactic governance under Council rule. Dr. Choi watched the proceedings, with amazement at how quickly everything had changed. 6 months ago, the Galactic Council seemed like a permanent fixture of civilization, he observed. Now we're creating something completely new, based on principles that humanity learned from a dying alien in a broken ship. The old order was gone, but something far better was taking its place. 1 year after Veltar's death, President Kyung-ho Jang stood in the council chamber that had once housed the Galactic Council and looked out at representatives from over 300 species. The Free Trade Confederation had grown far beyond what anyone had imagined possible and was bringing peace and prosperity to regions of space that had known only conflict and exploitation. The chamber itself had been completely redesigned according to principles of equality and transparency. Instead of the elevated throne where Chancellor Thys had once proclaimed his authority, there was a simple circular arrangement where every representative had an equal voice in discussions. We gather today to commemorate not just the anniversary of Veltar's passing, but the birth of a new era in galactic civilization, President Jang announced to the assembled delegates. The transformation had been more complete and more rapid than anyone had dared to hope. The economic principles that had made the original Nexari trade network successful were proving even more effective when applied on a galactic scale. Director Min-ho An had been tasked with coordinating the day-to-day operations of the Confederation, and his reports showed remarkable progress across every measure of galactic well-being. Trade volumes have increased by over 200% compared to the final years of Council rule, he reported, and for the first time in centuries we're seeing sustained economic growth in every participating sector. The success came from eliminating the artificial barriers and exploitative practices that the Council had used to maintain control. When species were free to trade directly with each other based on mutual benefit rather than Council mandates, the results were dramatic. Judge Yujin Song had been appointed to head the War Crimes Tribunal that was investigating 3 centuries of Council abuses. Her work was painstaking and often heartbreaking as evidence emerged of the systematic destruction of entire civilizations. We have documented over 50 cases of what can only be called economic genocide, she reported. Species that were eliminated, not because they posed any military threat, but because their success challenged Council authority. The trials were being conducted according to principles of justice that drew on legal traditions from across the galaxy. Former Council leaders like Chancellor Thys were being held accountable for their crimes, but they were also being given fair trials with full legal representation. We refuse to repeat the Council's mistakes by denying justice to our enemies, Judge Song explained. Everyone deserves a fair trial, even those who showed no such consideration to others. The tribunal's work was also serving an important educational function as species learned the full extent of what had been done in the name of galactic order. Many Council member worlds had genuinely believed that their government was maintaining peace and stability. Captain Tae-ho Kim had returned to his cargo routes, but his ship Soul's Pride was now carrying very different cargo. Instead of mining, equipment and trade goods, he was transporting diplomats, aid workers, and supplies for reconstruction efforts across the galaxy. It's strange, he told Hae-jin as they approached a former Council fortress world that was being converted into a refugee center. A year ago, we were just trying to make enough credits to keep the ship running, and now we're part of rebuilding galactic civilization. Hae-jin had been offered positions in the new Confederation government, but had chosen to stay with Taeho's crew. Her legal expertise was invaluable in helping former Council worlds navigate the transition to the new system. I think we're doing more good out here than we would in some government office, she replied. These people need to see that the Confederation is really different from what came before. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Some former Council species had attempted to maintain independence through military force, but these efforts had failed when their neighbors refused to support them. Admiral So-jin Kang commanded the Confederation's peacekeeping forces, but her role was very different from traditional military leadership. Instead of conquering territory, her ships were protecting trade routes, providing disaster relief, and helping to mediate disputes between species. "We're not trying to impose peace through force," she explained to her officers. "We're creating conditions where conflict becomes unnecessary because everyone benefits more from cooperation." The economic data supported her approach. Day and Lim's analysis showed that even former council loyalists were experiencing unprecedented prosperity under the new system. When you eliminate the artificial scarcity and exploitation that the council used to maintain control of the galaxies, productive capacity increases dramatically, she reported. "Everyone has more because no one is taking more than they contribute." The Confederation had also established something that had never existed under council rule, which was genuine representation. For species that had been considered too small or too primitive to participate in galactic governance, Dr. Won-Shik Choi had been studying these newly included species and was amazed by their contributions to the galactic community. "Some of the most innovative solutions to common problems are coming from worlds that the Council never allowed to speak," he observed. "We're discovering that diversity of thought and experience is one of our greatest strengths." The memorial to the Nexari had become one of the most visited sites in known space. Built in the system where Veltar's ship had been found, it honored not just his species, but all the victims of Council oppression. President Jiang stood before the memorial with representatives from dozens of species whose existence had been erased from official records by the Council. "We cannot bring back those who were lost," he said, "but we can ensure that their sacrifices were not in vain by building the kind of galaxy they would have wanted to see." The memorial contained archives with the complete records that Veltar had preserved, including detailed histories of species and civilizations that had been deliberately forgotten. Minister Yoon-Suk Han had been elected as the Confederation's first Secretary of Interspecies Relations, and her job was to help newly contacted species integrate into the galactic community. "Every week we're making contact with civilizations that the Council either ignored or actively suppressed," she reported. "The galaxy is far more diverse and interesting than we ever realized. Some of these species possessed technologies or knowledge that could benefit everyone, while others needed assistance to recover from centuries of isolation or oppression." The contrast with Council practices couldn't have been more dramatic. Where the old government had sought to control and exploit the Confederation, work to include and empower Chancellor Thys himself had been among those tried and convicted of crimes against galactic civilization, but even his punishment reflected the new approach to justice. Instead of execution or imprisonment, he had been sentenced to spend the remainder of his life working to repair the damage he had caused. He's been assigned to help coordinate refugee resettlement on his home world, Judge Song reported. "It's appropriate that he spend his remaining years trying to fix what he helped break." Captain Taiho often thought about Veltar during his travels and wondered what the ancient alien would think of what his gift had accomplished. The Soul's Pride was approaching a newly established colony world where former Council refugees were building new lives in freedom, when Heejin called his attention to something on the navigation display. "Taiho, look at this," she said. "We're getting a message from the colony, asking if we can transport some of their excess agricultural production to a neighboring system that's experiencing food shortages." It was exactly the kind of voluntary mutual assistance that had made the original Nexari trade network successful, and it was happening spontaneously across the galaxy as species learned to work together. "Set course for the colony," Taiho ordered, "and send word that we'll be happy to help." As the Soul's Pride changed course toward its new destination, Taiho reflected on how much had changed since that day, when they had answered a distress call from a dying alien. The galaxy was still vast and full of challenges, but for the first time in centuries, those challenges were being met through cooperation rather than domination. Veltar's dream of justice had been fulfilled, but more than that, his vision of a galaxy where all species could prosper together was finally becoming reality. The Free Trade Confederation wasn't perfect and would face many challenges in the years ahead, but it was built on principles that honored the best qualities of every species, including humanity's stubborn refusal to ignore injustice. President Jiang concluded the memorial ceremony with words, that would be remembered throughout the galaxy. Today we honor those who were lost, but we also celebrate what they helped us build. He said, "The galaxy they dreamed of is finally within our reach."